So, as promised, we are going to start with art. And Uzma Kazi has contributed for this meeting. So, Uzma is going to talk about her work with South Asian History Month, which it is at the moment. And but because she's busy doing that, she can't actually be here. But she has sent me a presentation and an audio piece. So I'm going to share my screen and share that with you now.
Hi everyone, my name's Uzma Kazi. I'm a Bradford born and bred artist. I work in the areas of performance design, youth and community development, and more recently I have just completed my master's in art psychotherapy. So these are the three areas of my work, and yeah, I guess I'm just here to present. I'm sorry that I can't be there online, stroke in person. But hopefully this will give you a little taster of the kind of work that I have been involved with. You know, my work is all about narratives, design, art, and identity ultimately. I'm interested in telling stories about who we are, where we come from. It's about owning our experiences. Certainly, my background being a South Asian female in Bradford certainly influences that, and that's something that is difficult for me to separate. And I'm very proud of that. I feel very lucky growing up in Bradford, and there's been some great encouragers and teachers and some lovely people to work with in Bradford. Other groups like Cecil Green Arts and Were Bradford. We also run a collective of storytelling once a month called 10 by 9 Bradford. I just wanted to highlight in my quick talk about artists and our messy process. Growing up as a teenager and in my early 20s, I have been discouraged to follow my passion of the arts and becoming an artist for a number of reasons, predominantly the stereotype that it doesn't give us enough money and it doesn't earn us a living. I think there's some truth in that. I also think that it's also, as artists, we need to work out what we want, how we want to do it, and in what capacity we'd like to do it. My work as a set designer, theatre designer, this work is never going to happen full time. It just can't. One of the things that I'm really interested in is thinking about how, as artists, we can share our messy process. How do we share the behind the scenes work? How do people see? How do we break those stereotypes down? And I think that would be an interesting thing to explore. So in the PDF, you'll see a few examples of some of the work that I have taken part in over the years. Working with organisations like Black Country Touring and Foresight in the West Midlands, to Northern Lines and Freedom Studios and many other organisations as well, doing the artwork. And it's not only set and costume design. It's also been about creating theatre design in non-traditional spaces, so site-specific work, festivals. I've worked a lot on puppetry, on storytelling projects that have then been performed, at the Amsterdam Storytelling Festival, for example. So that's quite an exciting part of my work. The other part of my work is community organising, so thinking about community development, workshops, dialogue, youth work, women's work, working at the heart in a grassroots way with communities, and particularly with communities who are ethnically diverse communities. I'm trying to find the right wording there, because there's a whole debate around diversity that we could have, maybe not right now, but it's certainly an area that I think needs more conscious thought in how we put on work in Bradford. Here is some of the work that I have done with communities. So thinking about when the EDL came and the response that came about from communities and civil service That was really important. Joseph Rowntree Foundation, tackling loneliness, putting on cultural community markets. I have to talk about the Square Chapati Club, which is a project about predominantly for South Asian women, but also beyond that. And it's exploring who we are, how we are, why we are the way we are, and what we want to do about it. It's about breaking the mold, it's about reflection, it's about actioning on a personal level. And we have a lot of fun doing it, making square chapatis. Another project I've done is the Grooming Ground project. Again, a very topical issue, and I think art for me is a way of, for me, I think it's all about how can we use art as a tool for dialogue? How can we use art as a way of connecting to issues that are really, really difficult and really sensitive in our communities? I think that's so important. So Grooming Ground is one way of exploring that. Art therapy as well is another area I'm currently exploring. Healing, community healing, one-to-one work. It has to be done in a very ethical and sensitive way. I'm looking for ways at the moment of exploring this in a really honest way. Immediately coming up is the Bradford South Asian Heritage Month. I put the details on the PDF there, so please do join us if you can. It's a range of South Asian-led activities which are going to be marked up until the 17th of August, and hopefully beyond that as well. So thank you for listening. I've just left my details there at the end of the PDF. My email is creativeresearchuk@gmail.com. And I do have a website that is in progress at the moment, so please give it a few days and hopefully it'll be up and running. And thank you for listening. Have a good day, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, thank you, Isma. I'll tell her I'll tell her that I saw the claps. So yeah, if you need to grab Usma's email from me, and that was a bit too quick for you to write down, just let me know and I can share that. But yeah, like she said, there is absolutely loads going on for South Asian Heritage Month, which we are in at the moment. So it's definitely worth finding out a bit more about that. So Alex, over.
Okay, I'm looking at the order we've got here, and I'm wondering actually whether it might make a bit more sense for me to hand over to Nick and Mark to talk about the Bradford cultural strategy first, and then I'll do my bit afterwards, because it kind of acts as a framing for the discussion that we're going to have after that. So Nick and Mark, do you want to take the floor and talk to us about Bradford's cultural strategy first?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. Do you know, that was amazing to see that, wasn't it? I just love kind of reminding myself of what the artist process is like. And yeah, sometimes you forget that. So it was a really nice reminder. So thank you for asking her to do that. Right, so cultural strategy. So last time I came when we were all physically in a space, and we talked about kind of sort of the approach of the cultural strategy and having a co-produced approach to it. So we took that kind of way of working to the Place Partnership, who agreed that approach. And thankfully, Al and Andrew and Mark did an incredible job about mapping the work that's happened over the last 2 years. I think one of the things we wanted to make sure we were doing was, as somebody new in the role, heard a lot from people that they felt like there's been a lot of consultation. And I guess that happens in all cities, but there was a bit of a consultation fatigue. So the last thing we wanted to do was to kind of sort of rehash loads of stuff. So let's look at what's happened over the last 2 years, all the incredible stuff that's been done through the Producing Hub, through the LEAP and other programs that you've all been part of. So what do we know already? What have we heard, and who have we heard from? So that piece of work has really helped us to understand who we haven't heard from, and what are the questions that haven't been asked. So part of that piece of work has enabled us to create a sort of series of next steps. So one is a series of provocations, really, and these have come about from stuff that you've all inputted to, whether it be through 2025, or like I said, Producing Hub and LEAP and other pieces of work. So these are things that have been heard from the sector pretty much. So we need to play those back, and we need those checked and challenged. So there's so Alex and Kira have agreed to facilitate a session around that. There'll be an invite for people to come and do that. Have we got a date, Alex, for that?
I think we're just working. What we're going to do is, and Mark, you can jump here as well, is that we've got 3 dates that we look like are possible in August. So we're going to send around a range of options to people with mornings, afternoons, and evenings to try and find a date that most people are available for, because we want to go to. And Mark, I don't know about you, but if it feels like actually 2 sessions because people are split across 2 sessions, we can probably look at doing 2, because I think it's crucial for us that we get everybody's kind of input at this stage.
Yeah, if that's okay with you, Alex, then I'm very happy with that.
Okay, cool. So we'll get those dates out to you. You can sign up to those sessions. Then the next piece of work is then, well, I think it's again what we talked about, or what I discussed when I came to meet you guys, is where does the cultural voice sit within a cultural strategy, and what's its role, and how do you connect to that? So because you're such a big group, it's really hard to kind of sort of work out how to do that. So we came up with a concept of similar to how we did with response, really, is how could we create a set of kind of commissions that comes out specifically to the cultural voice for you to respond to, which is in terms of kind of sort of a creative engagement. So we understand who the people we haven't spoke to, what we haven't asked them. So we've put that into kind of an artistic brief, and we're going to go out, I think, next week. Hopefully, the brief will go out next week. It will be on the Bradford City Council website, so a link will come through to all you guys in the Cultural Voice. We're not going to do like a big call out because we've only got 12 commissions, so it's £1,000 per commission, and we're only going to commission 12, so it's not a huge amount. So it's kind of sort of, that's why we're trying to kind of keep it within the Cultural Voice. But within your sort of networks, if you think there's other people that should apply or would be really good, well placed to do some of this, then please feel free to pass it on. But it's very Bradford specific. We only want Bradford organisations or artists applying. So the idea is that the brief will kind of sort of enable you to we look at who it is we haven't spoke to, what the kind of questions we haven't asked, and what's the kind of conversation we want to have with different people in the district, and what's a creative response to that. And part of the idea of setting out the kind of sort of like this is if we have the commitment that the cultural strategy should be an iterative process, then each year we should be commissioning work as part of that, which enables us to check and challenge what this 10-year process is going to do. Is kind of, are we really listening? Are we really feeding back? Are we really challenging what we're saying? So it's about embedding this right from the beginning. So that's the other piece of work. And then the third bit is we'll have an online survey, which would just be really great for people to get that out as far and wide as possible. Mark Dobson is supporting me, helping me do this work, and which is great because it's a big piece of work, and to try and do this on my own was impossible. So it's great that we've got Mark on board to help support that. So yeah, so it's kind of, that's the next steps for us. In terms of timescale, we're hoping to get a bit of a draft of the culture strategy, which by the way is called Culture is Our Plan, and I'll stop using culture strategy at some point. And to the creative place, so the place panel around, I think it's October, and the idea is obviously we'll hopefully launch in the new year. But this will also hopefully help feed what we do in terms of our grant funding as well going forward as a council. Mark, is there anything else you want to add on to that?
No, don't think so, except very happy to be involved and working with you on it, Nick, and working with everybody else. So I look forward to it. And
just a big thanks to Al and Andrew for the work that they did previously in getting us to this point as well. It's been the building block of where we've got to. So thank you.
Great. Thank you both. I mean, I don't know about everybody else, but it's genuinely really exciting for me that this is the point where all of the sectors being encouraged to feed into this kind of strategic document, and hearing you talk about the fact that, you know, commissioning processes are going to be tied into this strategic direction is is really exciting, actually. So, you know, when that link comes around, please do all reply to, you know, where your availability is for those sessions. And as I said, we will do our very best to make sure that as many people are able to be at those meetings, to feed in, to actually be part of that process. That's great. So thank you both. So we're kind of coming to the bit about the reason why we're all here today, or the reason behind it. So when we were talking about what the kind of meat of this discussion should be about today, what the real theme of this discussion should be about, both Rosie, Kieran and myself all kind of flagged up that at the moment it feels like the most critical pressure on Bradford's cultural infrastructure, cultural society, is on freelancers, is on people who are trying to sustain a career, who have seen in a lot of instances their entire work and livelihood disappear overnight. To put it into context, so I'm led to believe very strongly that tomorrow is when the government are going to announce the 1.57 billion distribution through Arts Council. So it's almost certain that is going to happen tomorrow. And it's looking very clearly like this bailout package is really going to be targeted to what the Conservative government think is the crown jewels, or what they class as the crown jewels. And I think we all know what that means. I think we're hopeful that that will mean NPO organisations, so actually wider across the infrastructure. But initial indications are that I think we would all be very surprised if any of that money is going to be easily accessible to the freelance or independent sector across the country. Now, when we came to talk about that and think about it, what we did think was, though, that Bradford is really ideally placed for us to try and counteract that, because we don't have those massive, or we don't have many of those massive organisations that in some other cities might soak up all of that money within the distribution. And it feels like, even though there are going to be organisations and cards on the table, Carla Sangham is going to need to get hold of some of that money from that pot, otherwise we don't make it. But actually the amount of money that we need in comparison to most other organisations is really quite small. So we have been looking as an organisation about how we can use this opportunity to potentially secure some income, but cascade and flow that down into the freelance sector as well. Can we open up our spaces, pay artists to be there, fill that financial hole that we've got, but do that by supporting the infrastructure that sits around us? Because I run an arts centre, and if the freelance sector disappears, there's nothing for me to put on, so there's no point in my organisation existing, full stop. And there are other organisations around within Bradford, so it feels like we're quite nicely positioned to have that conversation about what is it that the freelance sector needs? How can we all come together to support as many people within the freelance sector as possible? How can those larger organisations hopefully get hold of some money that we can then cascade down and help through? We've also got Bradford Producing Hub, which we're really lucky to have. We've got the LEAP, which we're really lucky to have, that are both kind of developing programs that can be part of this solution as well at the same time. So when we came to thinking about how we might break out into discussions to talk about this, the three discussion groups that we've kind of identified here are about one, which is about what funding and funding challenges are out there and how can freelancers build a sustainable income. One that's more venue focused, and you know, what's the impact on venues, but importantly for me and some other venues that we've been talking to ahead about this, how can we also have a benefit beyond those venues and to the wider sector? And the third one's about participatory arts, and how do we continue to deliver and do things within social distancing or within the restrictions that are in place. So looking at that overall impact, you know, really competitive trust and foundation applications, councils under increasing pressure for money that they might be able to cascade out, these limitations that look like they're going to be on the 1.57 billion, a massively increasingly competitive project grants fund for Arts Council. We thought it would be useful for us to have a discussion in those breakout groups about what can we do together, all of us? What can we do to ensure that most of us survive this current process? And I guess what I would encourage as we go into the groups is to have a conversation that's about, are there any specifics that we can bring out? is there any best practice that anybody's aware of that we can adopt from anywhere else? Does anybody have a really amazing idea that maybe they just need support from somebody else for them to make it happen? How can we connect people so that we make sure that those partnerships are in place, which will make all of us stronger? It's much more difficult for the Arts Council to cut one organisation if it needs to got a knock-on impact with other organisations or other artists. So what I hope is with the discussions that we can try and find some specifics, try and find some actual details within there that we might be able to then bring back that are proactive things. And they may be from the freelance sector challenges that you want to bring back to funded organisations to say, this is specifically what we need you to do to help. It may be challenges you want us to try and take on your behalf to the Cultural Place Partnership about wider funding that sits across the entire sector. It could be a challenge to Bradford Council. It could be a challenge to the Arts Council that we can help put on place. So let's try and have a really positive discussion that we can then use either to support you to develop things, or actually that we can then take into some of those strategic meetings to try and make a point and protect and support as many people in Bradford's infrastructure as we can. Rosie?
Yes, great. Thank you, Alex. So Sue's now going to put us into breakout rooms. They are going to be about 30 minutes long, and there will be, in each breakout room, there will be some hosts who will make themselves known to sort of help include everyone in the conversation and to make some notes and stuff. And when we get to the end of the time, there'll be a note that comes up on everyone's screen saying you're about to be thrown back in together. So Sue, are you ready to do the thing?
Yeah, I think everybody will just vanish, so be prepared.
We're all gonna Hi.
Hello, remembering to unmute myself.
Hi.
I can't stay very long, but I wouldn't mind a few observations on this fund.
Hi, everyone. The 1.57 billion, that one, or a different one.
Yeah.
Great. Is this everyone? So I'm going to be hosting and facilitating. I'm Kieran. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm the Vice Chair of the Cultural Voice Forum. And I'm also freelance writer and radio producer. So talk just a little bit about some of the kind of challenges I've had as a freelancer, but really I want to open up the discussion here so that we can all have a chance to speak and contribute and talk a little bit about funding and financial challenges. So yeah, just to reiterate, I think it's best if as Rosie said, if everyone's on mute unless you're speaking, because it helps with feedback, and also because this session is being recorded as well. Yeah, so it just helps in terms of feedback and making sure everyone gets heard. So that's great. So basically, when we initially sent out the email about this group to the Cultural Voice Forum, we asked for some feedback about your pressing concerns and challenges, whether you're a freelancer or whether you are an organisation that works with freelancers. So I just want to give a really quick summary of some of the group was responsible together, can just some kind of themes. And if you pen and paper, you write down each theme and start to have a think about whether it's something you raised or whether it's something you want to discuss a little bit more in a few moments' time. So I'll just go to my notes. Okay. So when we asked what are your pressing concerns, either as a freelancer, independent, or in relation to working with freelancers independents, the first theme I've pulled out is financing and funding resources. So looking at funding development opportunities to build transferable skills, particularly around time and resources needed to reshape business or services and create people's creative practice for what we're calling the new normal, but I'm starting to call it the new world, which I think, Rosie, you've also said. I think that's a better term at this stage. The lack of funding to pay for the development of digital content came up a lot. So, you know, this idea that we're all focusing on digital engagement access, but we also need to think about things like tech poverty and there's a digital divide for a lot of people, and in Bradford. So that's the kind of first one, finances and funding resources. And we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. The second theme I pulled out was local focus, engagement and outreach. So, you know, we're talking a lot about big picture money, big picture of our sector in terms of these big, you know, governmental support schemes like SEISS, I think is the acronym. The conversations go global very quickly or become politicized. So there was a few people that said, can we look at a local focus? Can we look at what the angle is for Bradford? For example, outreach being much more difficult as community centres and community spaces are the first direct contact with disadvantaged communities. If those communities are turning to social media and online forms of communication, this can be very isolating. So there's more issues of access and barriers we need to discuss. So that's the second one, local focus, engagement and outreach. And then the third one is organisational support and what I've called staying connected. So we've had a few of you say, as organisations, you're very open to conversations about how you can support freelancers and independents and work more collaboratively. And I think it'd be good to talk here a little bit about how we can support and listen to freelancers' needs, keeping in mind, obviously, participatory artists and live performances, which, you know, we're all kind of navigating what the new world and normal is around that, and the lack of venues for workshops and the reduction in festivals. So that was the third one, organisational support and staying connected. So in response to those three themes that have come out of your feedback, I want to help you frame and discuss some strategies and actions in this group. I'll try not to talk for too much longer because I want Lisa to say something as well about some funding options available. But I spoke to Kate Wellham, who a lot of you may know works on a freelance basis and has done some work for the BritBox in the past. She's actually in Croatia at the moment. She was going to try and join the meeting to tell you a little bit about what has been termed a portfolio freelance career. But it's similar to kind of what I'm doing at the moment. So what I thought I'd do is just summarize a little bit of what she's written to me to tell you what she would have said if she could be here. Because it's about professional development, example of transferable skills. And then we can move on to Lisa, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about more specific funding options available for freelancers. Is that okay, Lisa? Great, fantastic. So I'll just summarize what Kate has said. Okay, so she said, since leaving a full-time office role in 2014, I've been working freelance in both the cultural and corporate worlds, and I've learned a few things about how my particular skill set has translated between those two worlds, getting free work online. And the thing she wanted to throw out here, basically, this idea of translating any cultural bits and pieces you've done into job speak that the corporate world will understand. So if you're a freelancer and you do loads of different things, like I do as well, which is everything from writing to producing to more like actual hands-on arts projects. And Kate talked about setting up websites, running social media accounts, planning and commissioning digital art projects, making videos. The only term that really covers all of this is digital content producer. Sounds much professional than any of the individual activities when she's doing them. She's advised you to think about and use a professional term for anything you do well, and start using that term about your work all the time. I mean, this is a great advice for me because, you know, as I feel like I call myself jack of trades, just to say, you know, general arts producer. But if you can get as specific as possible with that, I think that's a great tip. And then she's actually given quite a few websites where she's consistent new work. So one is called People Per Hour, another is called Fiverr with 2 R's at the end, and the last is called freelancer.com. And she talks about there's lots of different types of work available on there, and almost all of it is remote working. There's a few caveats in that she found there's been time wasters, and there are some scam artists that run through these websites as well. She says a golden rule is to stick to having all communication and work through the relevant website until you've done at least a couple of jobs for a client and you can rely on them paying you. So I think that's really really useful tip. Finally, she says, have your own website, even if it's just a page that outlines what you do professionally with some examples of previous work. Send this link to potential clients, and it doesn't even have to have any of your cultural activity on it. So again, trying to bridge that cultural corporate world in terms of income sources and revenue. And she just finishes by saying, constantly looking for new gigs can be exhausting and a distraction from the cultural stuff you want to be doing. So the ideal scenario is to find 1 or 2 regular clients you can freelance for on an ongoing basis. I've tried to approach every new bit of remote freelance work as though it's got the potential to lead to more. And sometimes it does, either through word of mouth or that client coming back every time they have something that needs doing. And she's done this through freelancer.com as well. So if anyone wants to chat to her more, she said, please drop me an email at any time, kate@thebritbox.co.uk. So I found that really useful. I hope that's been useful, just to kind of summarize what she said, because it applies a lot to what I've been navigating. I became freelance a couple of years ago, and I have found there's so many different resources, and sometimes it's good just to have, one perspective on, okay, give me 3 websites, 3 ways of finding regular funding, where is that regular income that we need to support ourselves. And so I think that kind of brings me on to Lisa to talk a little bit about more specific pots of money that are available, including things like sub. To you, Lisa.
Hi, sorry, I dropped because my internet rejoined on my phone, so I'm really sorry I missed that last bit of sort of introduction. But just to briefly update then, I suppose, on what Bradford Producing Hub is doing and has to offer, just to give a bit of context. So we have a variety of different ways that we're trying to work with and support artists, both stuff that we planned anyway, but then also stuff that is in direct response to this crisis and the situation, and as you were saying, Kieran, sort of the new world. So one of those is a scheme which is about supporting artist development and opportunity, and some of that stuff you were mentioning at the beginning is definitely eligible in the criteria. So you're talking about paying yourself to develop and to create development in different ways. That's absolutely eligible for Spare Bob criteria. So that's £500 that anyone in the creative sector can apply for, but it is very much about development of self or organisation, not about delivering creative projects, which is one of the issues we've had, that the bit of sort of confusion around the criteria. And then in addition to that, much more sort of depth and one-to-one stuff through mentoring relationships. So people are having sessions with mentors that are around either their own personal journeys and development or organisational development. We've got people working with sort of production and digital experts to work out to take on. So we're doing a lot of this background very much. It very much requires an individual artist to kind of, I suppose, A, know that we're doing it, and B, approach us for it. So there's a lot of stuff we can do, but obviously our resources, everybody else, are limited, and we can't fix everything for everyone, but we are here to try and support the sector in these sorts of ways. So that's just a summary of some of the things we're doing, but we're very much a risk program trying to find to support the art in the ways that so open to you and go, with this missing, to hear that. So it's really useful to be part of this bit today. Right. Kieran,
great, thank you. No, that's fantastic. You just broke up a little bit there, but the session is being recorded, so I'll be able to write up what we've spoken about, and then we'll distribute it afterwards if anyone didn't catch any of it. I know I'm going a bit fast because we were 17 minutes left, and I want to make everyone has a chance to speak as well. So I want to just move on to thinking about kind of solutions focused ideas, recommendations, actions you'd like to take, or you just like to discuss here with other people to kind of, feed back some stuff towards your thinking. And what we'll do is we'll form a set of learnings and recommendations which we can use to feed into the cultural strategy, to other organisations, to the wider conversation, to strengthen, Bradford's cultural ecology. So yeah, I just want to open up the discussion now, really. And what I like to do when facilitating groups is to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. It's popcorn style, so please just whenever you like speak. I don't want to put anyone under pressure, but I'd like to make sure everyone has had a chance to speak at least once when we go round. So if you haven't already spoken once, you won't be allowed to speak again unless everyone else has at least spoken once. Does that make sense? It's a roundabout way of saying it. Yeah, so I open up the discussion for anyone who wants to contribute.
Hello everybody. Yeah, just in light of like the project grants becoming available, I don't know how relevant it is in this group, but just something that I would like to pass on, which was really useful to me in getting funding this year, was a book collated by Sabrina Mahfouz, who put a resource in the back of the book about applying for funding, and it's called Working Class and Smashing It. And on the back of that, she's also created like an online resource in light of the project grants being released and like it being more competitive than ever. And it's just a really straightforward guide for like normal people like me applying for something like that for the first time. So I would recommend that really to anyone, or for anyone to pass on.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kirsty. That's brilliant. I'm just writing this down as well, so that's great. Does anyone know of any other particular smaller grants they want to mention or income sources? Nick?
Sorry, I always feel like I bloody hog the thing and talk too much. I'll try and keep really. We're to launch, so obviously next week we'll be launching the small commissions for the cultural strategy. We will also be launching something called Show and Make, which is kind of a development piece of the grant account. This is in line with with Bradford being a city of film, and actually how do we really support a film community, not just filmmakers, but people want to kind of create events that are based around film as well. So the idea is we want to support people to create socially distanced events that encourage people to experience film in all of its genres and all of its kind of and its diversity. And we also will have a fund that's about making as well. So it'll be two-stage kind of for people that are more advanced in filmmaking, and will also be a smaller pot which is about people having a go and making new content. I think things that we learned from the response grant was there was a real appetite for it, but there was a lot of people that didn't have, as somebody's pointed out earlier on, didn't have the right equipment or the right resources, tools. So the idea is that this kind of these two pots enable people to get equipment, to be able to develop content that is for screen, and that can be this screen, or it can be a big screen, but it's about content making. So it's connected to City of Film because we have this incredible designation. And what does that mean for us as a city? So how do we explore that, and how do we start to support the filmmaking fraternity and people that are also really interested in understanding how you start to develop content for screen? As we all know, coming out of COVID, how important that is in terms of how digitally accessible our work is. So these grant pots are to try and kind of try and support that, I guess, to a certain extent, and kind of enable us to see exactly what the needs are, and what the development opportunities are for developing screen skills and screen activity in the district. So that's something that should hopefully be launched next week as well.
Nick, are you speaking to John over at XR Stories in York?
I've had an email from somebody about him yesterday, but I've not done anything about it yet.
I'd get on to him quite quickly, because they've XR Stories. I've just been speaking to him today, which is why he's on my mind, because he's preparing a report now for his exec board in terms of their priorities for funding over their next year is going to be their last year of funding from this particular pot. They've been told to focus very much on film and TV, and it has to be in the Yorkshire region. So it sounds as if there might be ways of linking up.
Okay.
I'm sure he will be interested to hear about the show and make strands and how maybe the people you support through that can also be supported via XR Stories. It's definitely worth a conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. But hopefully kind of sort of how we've shaped these 2 grant programs are a bit of a kind of sort of feedback from response, stuff where we thought there were gaps, some of the stuff that the Producing Hub has done in terms of what people kind of feeling they're missing in terms of equipment and stuff. So it's trying to answer a few things, and hopefully it will be a useful grant program for the district.
How do people go about actually getting involved? Is there a specific avenue, or how would you direct people to do that, Nick?
There'll be an application process, and they'll all go. They should go live within the next week or so, and then they'll be pushed quite wide and far. The cultural strategy is just through the cultural voice because it's so small, and it's about how the cultural voice is embedded in the cultural strategy. But the Make and Show will be pushed wider.
Great. Fantastic. Anyone else like to contribute? Rosie.
Hiya. So some of the things that I've heard that people find really useful, that freelancers and independents find useful when it comes to funding. So there being sort of the smaller and accessible grants are really good. And also the sort of short and sort of concise forms are really good. So I've heard people praising how good the Producing Hub forms are for the application process, and saying actually it was really easy to apply and it shaped my idea. So I think that's so making it accessible as a process to apply, but also those kind of, I think we saw in how many people kind of went for the response funding through the council. Again, I think the fact that it felt quite manageable chunks is really good. I mean, obviously, if there was a short form for loads of money, that would be nice as well, but that's a separate thing. Another thing is that I think being clear to people what funding support is available is really useful. So obviously, organisations like the BritBox, like Carla Sangham, there's loads of organisations that can offer in-kind support as well for budgets. And so, for independents and freelancers putting together grant applications, that I think it'd be really useful is if as a collective of organisations, we could make it really clear, or clearer, how we can support through in-kind funding. And also by kind of looking over applications and stuff. I know Alex Croft, for example, often looks over applications, but there'll be other people in the cultural voice who have those sorts of skills. So I think that's really worth, if there was a way that we could, I haven't got an idea yet of how to do it, but if there's a way that as a cultural sector, we could say, these are the kind of people that you can come and ask. And then the other thing I would say is that I know for MPOs and other, larger organisations that get grant funding, there are often small bits of money that come up, and it might be someone to do your social media for a bit, or it might be someone to help do front of house or something like that. And those bits of money, like we heard from Kate, those are the kind of transferable skills bits of money which actually freelancers might really benefit from. So kind of finding little pockets of money where you can get people involved in your organization in different ways, not just as, if they want to, assuming, not just as artists or not just as this or that. It's, there's a kind of a whole ecology where we spend money as a sector. So I think using that kind of spending power in something which is quite, which is kind of more holistic when, times are tough, I think that could really, really help. So those are things that came to my mind. Thank you.
Fab, that's great. That reminds me, actually, I was going to say this idea, like when it comes to the Arts Council, there's things like small capital bid grants. And we have talked previously in other meetings about collaborating on bids, or giving freelancers the opportunity to, to at least meet so they can think about co-funding and collaborating on those kind of bids. And so I suppose that's another thing just to throw into the conversation. If there's, you know, if there's ways to use the cultural voice or the forums just to increase those networks and those connections, if there are ways to collaborate, because I think that's one of the kind of spirit of Bradford too, in collaboration in the arts. Yeah, does anyone else want to contribute? We've got about 6 and a bit minutes left. Shannon, great.
Yeah, I really agree with what Rosie was just saying. I was reading a thread earlier on Twitter, and it was saying it wasn't just about freelancers, but also small organisations like the Peace Museum, where you have a really small team. And yeah, with funding applications, you look at some of them, and the amounts of money that are available are just not going to be necessarily worth the time. And I don't think it's just about the application either. It's like the evaluation and things as well. And sometimes you get the evaluation form sent afterwards, and you're like, really, you know, and the amount of time that would take. Obviously for an organisation that's a little bit easier because, you know, I'm salaried, but for a freelancer that time is then not accounted. And yes, I think there's definitely something about easy applications but also easier evaluations, or being a bit more kind of upfront from the beginning about what the evaluation is actually going to require. And then yeah, about kind of making opportunities like more available. As an organisation, we're a museum, we obviously have a collection, we have space. It would be great to have something that connects people. We put out a little statement right at the beginning of lockdown because we were quite lucky in that we didn't have to furlough any of our staff. So we had our 4 members of staff working from home. So we kind of said, you know, if there is anybody who wants in-kind support out there as an organisation, because we're all still working, we could offer that. So yeah, something that brings that together would be really, really great, and it'd allow us to get involved in more projects and use our space and you know, create new opportunities for our work, but also while supporting the kind of freelance and independent sector as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Shannon. Tim, you put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't paying attention, Shannon, but you say we. Who is we?
I work at the Peace Museum.
Ah, right, okay, yeah.
Great. Sue's just said 5 minutes, so we've still got a little bit of time. Geeta.
Hi everyone. I just had 2 points. One is there a possibility of people getting together to do a consortium bid? Because sometimes that's a good one to do. And second thing is, because I'm not going to be bidding, but I'm happy to help with looking at funding applications and supporting them, because I've gone through years of looking at project applications as well as capital, which is a bid I put in for Kalasangam, which was for about 1.5 million. So I could do that sort of help for anybody who wants me to have a look at applications, because it comes from a different view altogether.
I really love the idea of a sort of pool of funding godparents who could, you know, like yourself, Geeta. Al Dix has said, you know, he's got loads of funding in the past and has said he's happy to look over things. So it sounds like that's something that that's an action which the Cultural Voice could, you know, could get together, and then people could come to us and say, is that who, you know, who from your pool could look over my thing. So yeah, nice one.
Yeah, I love that idea of a pool. I'm going to write that down as well. Fantastic, thank you. So just going back over the 3 particular themes that I brought out of the feedback, if anyone wants to say anything else. So financing and funding resources and development opportunities, particularly around digital engagement, development of digital content, local focus, engagement and outreach, looking at what the angle is for Bradford, and organisational support and staying connected. And it's great to think about actually the specific things, you know, which we can do in terms of strategy and actions going forward. Anyone else have anything they'd like to contribute?
Just a small point from Freedom Studios. One of the first things we did in the beginning of lockdown was to give the money we had budgeted for our associate artists to them in full and upfront, without strings attached, because I think one of the issues of getting money to freelancers, particularly in the smaller grants, and this was quite small, it was £1,000, but in that sort of order of things, is that there's actually quite a lot of work so there's work that has to go into applying for it, and then there's work that has to go into delivering it. And in this set of circumstances at the moment, some people just might not have that capacity. If they've got caring responsibilities, if they've got mental health issues, if there's, and I do think actually that there is money that should just go into survival, and that's okay. We don't always have to give money to people as artists and go, you have to produce something as a result of that. Sometimes existing is enough. It sounds a bit possibly radical, but it felt to us, certainly as a company, that was necessary. We just said, take £1,000 and survive for the next, and if you want to produce something, we are here for you to help you do that, but you don't have to. So yeah, sometimes is there the support there which just allows people to exist without having another pressure added to them at a point where they might not be able to facilitate that.
Fantastic. I just want to make sure anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak still gets some time. Shaya, Mary, if you want to say anything. It looks like we're running out of time. We might have literally about 30 seconds.
No, I've just been listening. My internet connection's quite poor, so I'm just listening.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
Okay, we've got 55 seconds. Nick Greener, do you want to say something?
Oh, you're muted.
You're mute.
Like the countdown now, isn't it? Like just quickly in response to Alex, I totally hear what you're saying, and actually that's the great part of having cultural organisations that can do that. Sadly, a council can't because of because it public funds and the scrutiny that comes with it. It's hard for us to be able to justify giving money just to survive. I completely and totally get it and understand it, but that's why we need tiered kind of sort of organisations working in ecology so that you can do that, because we're not able to do that. So just kind of saying that, I agree with it, but and think it's the right thing.
Oh, here they come.
Very expertly done, Sue Easterbrook. Well done.
Thank you.
Paul was cut off in mid-flow there.
Making a good point though, Paul, that we need to consider access as well when we're talking about all of that.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're all back in the room. Alex, do you want to chair this? Thank you again, Sue, for putting us in rooms and bringing us back again.
Okay, so I don't know how is it. Should we are going to share all of the notes and everything afterwards, but if there's somebody from Group 1, so the group that was talking about funding and funding challenges and building a sustainable income, is there anyone who just can sum up very briefly what that conversation was like? Looking back, is Kieran still here? Maybe Kieran could do it.
Yeah, I'm here unless anyone else wanted to say anything and didn't get the opportunity. I've written up some notes I can share. Okay, well, we talked about specific funding options for freelancers, but also how organisations can get more involved with supporting freelancers. And we've had some really good suggestions for specific resources for funding, like particular guides. One's called Working Class and Smashing It by Sabrina Mahfouz. And we also talked about smaller commissions for cultural development through the council, which Nick's mentioned, and particular response grants, which there'll be more information coming up. smaller and accessible grants like the Bradford Producing Hub scheme, which is the Spare Bob fund, which Lisa can give more information about if needed, and talked about in terms of an organizational perspective, like how can organizations support freelancers, especially when it's not such a big pot of money they're going for, but they do need that additional support or another set of eyes to look over an application form. So organisations like the Peace Museum and the BritBox and Geeta, who also offered the possibility of people getting together for a consortium bid, and this idea of pooling our resources, especially as we have this fantastic resource of people in the cultural voice forum and sector getting together to think about how we can all support each other a bit more in terms of funding and finances available for freelancers. Yes, that's kind of a quick summary based on my notes.
Great, that's brilliant, and chimes very much in with what we were talking about in the second group in terms of the big thing that came out of there is about pooling resources there and looking at who has the outdoor space attached to their venues, who's going to have some of the resource to be able to deliver and put artistic work into those spaces. How can we be flexible across the period where, you know, there may be localized lockdowns, then, you know, there may be ongoing reluctance for people to return to venues of any size, let alone our larger venues. And Richard was talking specifically about Bradford 2025 and that need for identifying where that sweet spot is between waiting for this to all blow over and us getting back to normal, if that's ever going to happen, and this point at the moment where everybody's stuck on Zoom and we're all living our lives online. Where's that sweet spot in between the two, and how can we open up as much possibility about that using other spaces or using our traditional spaces? And right at the end of the meeting as well, I think there was a really interesting comment, the idea that we might want to pull together a kind of working group of people who are interested in exploring that, and I know I'd be really interested in being part of that, as I know Yvonne and Lizzie were both talking about that too. So I think that would be interesting, and if there's scope for people who are interested in helping us look at that across the district and where the opportunity might be, then do let us know. But I mean, actually in half an hour, I don't know what anyone else in that room thinks, but it felt like we barely touched the surface of that discussion. Actually, I think we could have gone on for another couple of hours talking about it. So I wonder whether there is also a need for a very specific venue-based conversation that's about that shared learning there. So those people who are running venues, to allow us to share about stuff about process, about reopening, about best practice COVID-19 precautions and those sorts of things. So I think we'll probably look to set that conversation up as well, and I don't mind kind of leading on that too. Is there anybody want to say anything else from that group, or is that kind of summed it up? And is there anyone from the third group talking about participatory arts and who wants to share something with us from that?
Do you have the notes?
Yeah, do you want me to go through it?
Lovely, Katie. Yes, please.
So I was talked about, I'll just get to the top. So we talked about the reducing numbers in sessions and sort of looking at sometimes the pressure from funding bodies about quantity and quality, and how obviously we're not going to be able to cater for as many people. Also financial barriers to accessing things digitally, in terms of, like Mo mentioned, digital poverty and how people don't have the devices, and obviously there's language barriers and a generational barrier as well, people that don't understand how to use the technology. So looking at how we can incorporate that into funding in future, and also like the cost of like masks and gloves and things like that, hand sanitizer, like practical things. We also looked at how can the bigger sector help, so in terms of like the bigger organisations, in terms of again like space and sort of getting smaller numbers of people into bigger spaces. So I'm just looking through, and also safety for people, so people are afraid to come out now, and sort of how do we start slowly with few numbers and build up. Also, May talked about a really good idea of having a point of contact, like a supporting role, who would be in charge of, people could contact them if they were worried about attending a session or an event, and they could be the person to deliver things or to check guidelines and keep a tab on that, so there's not as much pressure on like the main facilitator or organizer. We also talked about the introduction of going online, reducing childcare needs, and also people that might have anxiety and things like that feel more secure at home and using online, so a more positive thing. And also the improved outreach. We talked about how we've been able to reach a lot more people, like some people have reached international audiences. I was talking about working in the community and how a lot more people have engaged with online surveys and things through Facebook, and we've reached many more people rather than if we held them. Lucy talked about contracts. How do we need to change contracts so that from an actor's point of view, how will you feel safe in a job, and what happens if you need to self-isolate, and sort of that security around that. And also as like a director or leading on a project, obtaining funds for if actors need to self-isolate, what do you do and how do you navigate that, and talking about higher contingencies to accommodate for those kinds of things. Vince also talked about teaming people up with a digital artist or some sort of tech whiz that could help support and things like that. I think, and the last thing was more about adaptability, so being sort of more flexibility on funding for organisations and freelancers adapting to what is being thrown at them, basically trying to carry out a project or a piece of theatre. I think that was about it really, if anyone else wants to add anything else.
Sounds like there was plenty more time for discussion there as well, and plenty more things that you could have put on. Vince, did you want to say something?
Just the adaptability for theatres as well, so that if I know, you know, I'm in discussion with a festival in Aberdeen, and they're very open to, if it can't happen, if it gets postponed, then we can link it in with some other time, you know, funding dependent, but just theatres being really adaptable to it and open to discussion and trying different ways.
Great. So I mean, it's you know, what I'm hearing is that from all three of those sessions, kind of flexibility around provision and working together and strengthening all of the partnerships that we've got is going to be really useful for everybody, actually. So, you know, keeping this dialogue going is really important. And I guess the one thing that I wanted to say with kind of my chair hat on, and but also as well, somebody who's, you know, partners in strategic bids and is looking at NPO applications going forwards and those things, from the freelance sector, you know, I would just be really happy for this Cultural Voice Forum as well to be a forum where if you've got suggestions, if you've got thoughts for what organisations can do or what anyone else can do, then I think I would encourage you to share those thoughts. And if that's just an email direct to me, or if it's going to Brickbox or anything like that, then do let us know if you've got ideas about how, you know, it may just be you want to come to us and we can be the point that signposts you to the right person to have a conversation with there, and we can act and have that role if we need to. It might be that you need us to make an introduction to someone. It might be that you want us to bring something to one of these sessions, an idea. It might just be you want a sounding board to talk about something. Then, you know, we're here, and I know a lot of Cultural Voice Forum members are here for that reason too as well. So let's make best use of the expertise that we've got in this room, because as I look around, there's a lot of people with a shed load of experience that's sat here who know a lot of stuff, and it feels like actually by working together we can really help support ourselves through it.